Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Rehet Thomas. I've been with the Council for 16 years, working with Chris Norrington, manager of the Business Liaison team, and we support all the local businesses across Woking. Today's topic is back to business. Woking shopping centres have welcomed customers back since the doors closed the end of March. Only essential shops like Boots and Sainsbury's remained open during lockdown. They have put safety measures in place and taken precautions in order to reassure retailers and customers. Among the safety measures in operation at the centres are one-way systems, hand sanitizer stations, signage, and also reminding customers to keep their social distance, as well as enhanced cleaning regimes have been put in place. This morning we are joined by John Paul Jackson, Centre Manager, and Rowan de Graaf, Customer Experience Manager for Woking Shopping, to share their experience since opening up the centres. Both John Paul and Rowan have extensive retail experience, and we are looking forward on their view with regards to the present situation and also looking at the future situation. We are also joined by Jennifer March-Jones, Sales Manager at Debenhams. Previous to that, she worked at M&S for 12 years, so fully understands the customer journey and expectations. We are also joined by Damien O'Dell, Store Manager at Primark, and looking forward to your valuable input this morning as well. So John Paul, if I can kick off with you, what has the reaction been so far from customers and the shop owners to all the new measurements that you have put in place?
Well, as you say, Ria, the biggest with customers, biggest change with customers and the business owners will have seen is the social distancing measures that we've put in place, and particularly the one-way system in the Peacock's Atrium and Central Square in Wolsey Place. And I must admit, because they're unfamiliar, they're unfamiliar with it, it's taken them a bit of getting used to. So what we've done is we've strategically positioned some of our security officers there to help people navigate the way around. I mean, it's not ideal. The building was never designed for people to walk around in just one-way system. But I mean, I think in balance, the majority of people have managed to adapt. We still have one or two people that, despite all the signage, despite all the messaging, are confused, and that's, as I say, why we have this sort of personal interaction to encourage them to do that. Some feel, I do get some feedback from people to think it's a bit of an inconvenience, which does surprise me, because what we do tell them is it's there for everyone's safety. It's there to try and keep everyone safe, and also it's in compliance with the government guidelines as well.
I agree with you. Popped in yesterday and I saw the security managers, assisting people with a one-way system. And I also went up to London, and just getting used to the one-way systems, even in the tubes or cross bridges. And I think it does make you feel safe. Jennifer, how have you experienced it in Debenhams with your customers and your staff?
I think for us it's actually been quite successful. Obviously, we haven't done a one-way system throughout the store, purely because ultimately we're not able to make everyone walk from the top all the way down to the bottom and through every single department, but we do have the space to be able to sort of let people have many access as possible from all different fixtures and whatnot. So obviously we've looked in the sense of spacing out fixtures, really looking at some of the fixtures that we have got in certain mats. And actually, I think the one-way system for us from the Peacock Centre into store has been really good. The only thing we've had difficulty with is trying to man everyone, trying to turn to their left when exiting the store. I think it's amazing how many people get confused with the direction of an arrow. But in all fairness, it's actually been really good for us. And now that we've opened up the lifts and all of our exits and entrances as well, it's not proven any difficulty for us, really.
That's great. Damien, from your side, how has it gone in your store? Damien, can you hear us? Oh, he's frozen for a minute. Can I just ask another question while we maybe just send Damien a message, Chris, and see to unmute himself? Woking has always been recognised as you know, an accessible town for, especially for shopping and for the elderly. Has any of the stores been reconfigured to make it more spacious for people maybe with wheelchairs to move around and feel safe? Rowan or Paul, John Paul, would you like to comment on that? Oh, just unmute yourself.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I think the focus has been on creating space to enable people to maintain the social distancing rather than necessarily accessibility for disabled, because obviously normally those measures would have been there. As you say, the sense of gender, I mean, Wolsey Place obviously is all at ground level, so it's been fairly accessible. Peacock Centre has got the lifts, and we've got the shop mobility. I would say that shop mobility is only sort of partially reopened, so that's the facility where people can pre-book wheelchairs and motorised scooters. They're only open 2 days a week at the moment, so I suppose that takes a bit of organisation for people who depend on that. In terms of the shops, as far as I can see, what the focus has been on is creating an environment where people feel safe when they're in there, because there's more space. The big points tend to be at entrances and exits and at the counter. I don't know if retail colleagues can maybe expand on that a wee bit.
Yeah, so for example, in Debenhams, we've, even though our custom toilets have been closed, but in terms of disabled toilets, we've always left them open, and that if anybody needed to go to the bathroom, then members of staff would then assist and open up the facilities and everything like that. Obviously our lifts were shut, and we only had a couple of exits open and entrances open during the first few weeks. However, because of the Peacock Centre lifts, we had hosts at the front of our store, and ultimately we were saying anybody with prams or wheelchairs, that they were being directed to the Peacock Centre lifts to be able to use to get up and down onto our different levels. And like John Paul said, that we've actually got a larger space and area now in front of the till points. And as I said previously as well, we've already spaced out all of our fixtures across the whole store.
That sounds wonderful. Welcome, Damien. I see you've joined Rowan now.
Yeah.
If we...
no signals will come to the social distancing, just about.
If we can go back to the very first question, what has the reaction been so far in Primark for the customers and for the staff?
Okay, so I think from the customers, they've. I mean, we're measured on obviously we have a customer service surveys that come in all the time. It's called in-moment feedback, and literally our service scores have been really high since coming out of that. We've almost had 90%, which is we've seen a big uplift, and they've been so complimentary on the cleanliness and the hand sanitisers we've had in place. The fact that we've got every other till open. They feel really safe and comfortable to be going shopping. I'd also say on top of that that the one-way systems really obviously helps as well, that navigate towards the shopping centre itself. I think it's been really positive from a customer point of view. We've even almost, our sales figures, we've almost matched the previous year as well, which I think is really good considering we're only trading off half the amount of tills available.
That's good feedback. That's reassuring, and I'm sure it will just get better. Do you want to ask a question, Chris, or?
Well, yeah, I was just going to ask a question on that footfall. Have you? I mean, John Paul told me 2 weeks ago that footfall was about 30% of this time last year. Is that reflected in the stores from your point of view? Both Jennifer.
Clarifying that question, so you're saying that you think the footfall's 30% on what it was last year?
Is that right, JP?
I think that was when we spoke. That was probably a couple of weeks ago. We have got a situation where basically the equipment we've got now, we actually installed a new system. It was commissioned just prior to lockdown, so we're not exactly comparing apples with like for like, but the feeling I've got is now it's about probably 60% down. And if you look, we've got obviously access to national statistics and a breakdown via Savills, and that tends to reflect the national trend that footfall is still about 60% down on 2019.
Yeah,
And
going into detail on the footfall, so I've got some figures here from Savills.
yeah, that was the next question to you, Rowan. Do you want to give us a bit of feedback about that, and then also maybe touch on what's the trend across the country and how does it differ for Woking, and does it differ in any way?
So looking at footfall, Savills as a group, we have footfall reported through on 63 of our shopping centres. So looking at it as a group, so we monitor the footfall as a group and then also on the national trend. So from our portfolio, we're looking at, we are 68.3% down on footfall for June as a group against the national trend, which was 71.2. So looking at that, it's still down there. I think people just need a little bit more reassurance that it is safe to come out. And I think that might change now from next week, where it's advised that members of the public wear face masks in store, so that might give them a little bit more reassurance to actually come out and support their local retail outlets. Looking further into footfall, so we also break them down into regions. So looking at London and home counties, footfall down 67.9% still for June. Midlands schemes were down 59.4%. Looking at North East, down 67.7%. Northwest, 74.2%. Scottish schemes, obviously, the Scotland retail sector's only just recently reopened again, and they reported for June they were down 84.8%. And then we fall into the Southeast schemes. So, as JP mentioned in the beginning, we were looking at around 30% of against our usual footfall statistics, and Southeast schemes were for June were reporting down 62.2%. So we're slightly below average, but again, we're looking at how we can, in the next couple of weeks, try to uplift on that footfall with using marketing tactics, etc.
I think that's surprising, actually. We're not. I mean, what you did, the best case 60% down. So you're 40% of actual footfall in the shop. It seems busier than that for me. And as I said, if we're doing the year figure, then either a lot of the customers that are coming in are all going to Primark, or surprising that. I think it's higher than. I think it seems busy. Football seems quite high for this time of year.
Well, that was what I was leading on to, is that certain brands have a definite customer loyalty that are bucking the trend. TK Maxx being the other I noticed. From the day they opened, there were queues and queues and queues. But yet a lot of retail outlets weren't open and there were no one in any of the other shops. So I think there's a brand, certainly a brand loyalty going on, certainly at the beginning. Was there a spike or a definite increase when the restaurants and bars and pubs opened in footfall? Or was it too soon to tell?
Well, the thing is, we don't have that many restaurants reopened. If you think as restaurants, we have a lot of food on offer, but as you know, obviously that we have the street food offer in Market Walk. It's very popular, and over the lockdown period, that's been enhanced. There's additional outlets opened up in Market Walk. Obviously, we've got the likes of Costa and Brett's, Black and White. So the cafes, if I put it that way, coffee-led businesses, they've actually been doing fairly well on a takeaway basis. I've noticed that now that they are able, in Greg's, another one, they're able to let people sit in. They're reasonably popular. But restaurants as such, well, obviously that's a sector that had well documented difficulties before COVID, and we've seen obviously the casual dining group go into administration. That means that Café Rouge and Las Iguanas are affected by that, and before that Carluccio's. We have Bills, but I know they are planning to reopen, but I don't actually have a definite date for that yet. So I wouldn't say, and that sector is going to, I would say, have its challenges, and we've seen they've not been in a rush to reopen yet.
Jennifer, if I can come to you, do you want to just comment on footfall in Debenhams since you've opened?
Yeah, I mean, when we opened, unlike, TK Maxx, we didn't have a huge amount of people queuing, getting ready to come in. However, since we've had our spectacular event, we did see an increase. And I think that's where our customer loyalty comes into it as well. And for example, like, our sale is launching next week. We've also got a beauty event as well. So again, where those customers are being emailed about these events, that's where we tend to see the footfall rise. I would probably say we are in line with the centre in terms of footfall. And that really and truly for us, it's been steady, it's been constant, but we've never exceeded our initial sort of capacity for the first few weeks. But certainly now we'll never reach the capacity that we're allowed to have now. But it has been getting steadier now.
Thank you for that.
Can I just add on to that?
Yeah.
One of the points that I wanted to raise was, you've got to imagine that when we came in, although the footfall it's not the only factor, it's the average basket, how much customers are going to spend. So we saw like a 40-50% increase throughout our business of customers going in and buying almost double what they would buy at the time. So obviously from a sales perspective, you're still getting the actual cash through more units, but less customers. And I guess they were trying to catch up from not being able to buy any clothes for a certain amount of time. We saw big uplifts in things like children's wear because they'd grown out of sizes quicker. Certainly the weather had changed from when the season had changed when we had gone in from when we'd gone or were in lockdown. So I think that that's a consideration, but also now the next point around this is, because they've now gone out, binged and got everything, and they've now got other things to spend their money on. So what we've seen is actually, we did have a big spike when we sort of opened, but it's sort of come down now a little bit because retail shops were like the next thing on the list that were open. Now more other people have got other attractions to go and spend their money on, so probably spending less money in shopping centres, I think, as a whole. For the time being. And then obviously you've got the capacity issues and how much you can, for example, restaurants, they're only allowing so many people in. I went yesterday down into Gunwharf into a Hubbox restaurant, and they've literally got 50% of covers on, so they can't physically take that capacity. It's going to slow up the sales. So I think overall, I mean, what you say, 60% down, I would say footfall, it doesn't seem to be that down, because the high streets do, in my opinion, seem busy, and especially down outside. I think, depending on how they measure it, I would say it's down probably I would say 40% down.
But that's what I was saying, because Ron's quoting June figures, and that's what I was saying when I was to earlier on. It's moving all the time. Every week, the new businesses opening extra business, because obviously this week we've had the health and beauty opening up, so the figures are recovering week on week. Yeah. And I would agree with you. I would say, as we speak today, I think we're probably 40% of, near 40%, and probably a bit more than that, of 2019 figures. And as I say, it's as businesses open up, and the next sector is obviously the restaurants and bars, to see adapt to the conditions that they've got to work within.
I think it's really interesting to see how it unfolds, and as you say, every week we move forward. Just last night I was returning home around 10 o'clock, and it was quite eerie driving around and seeing pubs being closed on a Wednesday night at 10 o'clock and it's dark. You know, so hopefully, as you say, that, you know, week by week it will get busier. So the next question to all of you: what changes do you think will stay in place for the foreseeable future? You know, we're talking the next 3 to 6 months, even longer maybe. And how do you think that will affect your business? Jennifer?
I guess in the sense of, obviously, as we've spoken before, people having to wear face masks and shields and everything. I think it's that sort of educating the public with that. But also it's things like the fact that we now have a refund area. So we have one refund desk, whereas before you could refund at all till points. But bearing in mind that we need to make sure that we're handling in terms of quarantine and everything, with stock coming back into the business. So that's something that potentially for us that we'll end up keeping. And then just being mindful of that space on the shop floor, you know, making sure that we've got the 2 metre gaps and everything, and that understanding that we need to keep our distance and respect other people's personal space and everything.
Rowan, do you want to comment on that? How do you see the future with the current things in place?
Well, naturally we'll still take on board the government guidance as to what we should be doing, and just leading on what they say. But I think also it's looking at from a shopping centre perspective, as to looking at the way that people move around the malls. We relocate certain retailers on the mall, such as commercialisation stands, etc. And then we'll pick up later on this discussion on how we look at things like events going forward and things like that. So,
Damien, and from your side?
Yeah, I think with the face mask is going to be interesting from going live from next Friday, so a week tomorrow. Just the guidance at the moment is that the retail staff aren't wearing face masks, which I'm not sure. There's been debate about that, whether or not that's a good thing, and whether or not businesses will and shopping centres will try and encourage that the retail staff do use them. I think on the other side of it, going down to 1 metre plus and relaxing of the lockdown rules, is that potentially we can increase our till capacity to then have, if we've got till screens, we can then have more tills open, and that would also lead to perhaps having more, if it's a safer shop, then we can have more customers in. Having said that, we've never got near our capacity, very rarely got near our capacity figures anyway for the time being. In terms of stock planning, we obviously we did take a bit of a cut on the current season stock, but I think we'll have to see how we catch up for next season now. Almost like right off a certain part, we have to take the hit, and then obviously move on in that respect. But yeah, it just depends really on how. I mean, in Scottish stores, what we've seen is that it hasn't affected trade. The fear was that customers don't want to go and shop because it's not comfortable wearing a mask. But we haven't seen that at all. So I think it's how we manage it would be an important question.
I would have thought that the customers, given that in theory they only need to wear the mask when they're in the shop, so for a reasonably short period of time, I think the challenge is going to be, as you say, for staff. It's going to be quite an ask to ask staff to wear a mask.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Can I move on to the next question, which I'd like to ask Rowan? As obviously entertainment is still not allowed, what will it take to bring customers back into the shopping centres? You know, with you as being the customer experience manager, are there any things that you are planning over the next 3 to 6 months that will get people into the shopping centres?
Well, before we went into lockdown, retail was already in a whole changed position, looking at going away from your standard events that were in shopping centres. Things were heading more towards experiential events, sort of different types of entertainment, etc., and creating the theatre of retail to try and bring people back to shopping centres rather than shopping online. Now looking at lockdown, social distancing, things will obviously not be able to be as they were before. So things like large-scale events, like our Christmas light switch on, etc., due to social distancing and not knowing what's going to be happening in the next 3 to 6 months, events like that have been cancelled effectively for the remainder of the year. So it's looking at more leaning towards online activity, looking at potential, again, creating the theatre in a shopping environment. So not having physical interaction from a customer's perspective, but providing some sort of entertainment or something just to ease the uncertainty on the mouths and to create a pleasant shopping environment. So it's not a one size fits all. Obviously, nobody knows what the next 3 to 6 months hold. So it's just trying to act on the spur of the moment to try and make sure that everyone feels at ease and still provide that safe and pleasant shopping environment.
And probably trial and error as well. Jennifer, you mentioned that you have emailed some of your customer base and you're having events. What would you like to explain, sort of what type of events you're talking about?
Yeah, so I mean, we've got our business-wide beauty event, so where you spend £50, you get £10 worth of points in the beauty card. But on top of that, rather than just necessarily keeping it to that basic, is that we're looking at now maybe seeing if there's a way that we can do tutorials with staff and with customers. So for example, obviously we can't do touch testing. All the testers are out now in terms of beauty, so customers are more than welcome to have samples and everything now. But where we can't colour match and everything, I think now we're trying to think outside the box, where we always have a one-to-one experience and almost try and book people in, that they come in and sit at, say, Longcom, and then during their experience they'll have items of samples that only they have touched and have got from separate packages and things rather from the shop floor, and then our beautician will then end up sort of talking through how to apply and things like that. So I think it's almost like trying to think outside the box really now. Obviously we're being greatly led by Debenhams with what's going on around the stores, but then locally just trying to do something slightly different.
Thank you for that. We're running out of time. I'm just going to ask each one of you to touch on, if you can pass something on to any of the other retailers that you've learned and that you've changed during all these new precautions that you've implemented, what would that advice be? If we can start with you, John Paul.
Well, I think basically really have to look after, I mean, it goes without saying, but you have to look after your customer. You have to engage with your customer, and you have to make sure your customer feels safe and secure. So you're basically communicating the message of what you're doing to look after the customer and encourage the customer to connect.
Damien?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, I would echo what John Paul has said. I also think the best case is just to be as, I guess, use as much common sense as possible. Like some of the experiences we've had over the last 3 months has been, we've never been in that position before, and I would just say, whatever it is, just don't overcomplicate it for yourself, and just make it as clear and as possible so people understand. I think when you overthink things, you can end up making more of a problem. I think going forward. So whatever you can take from that, but that would be my gist on it.
Rowan?
As we have in all of our marketing campaign, keep smiling, try and stay positive, even though they are quite dark days, and just push ahead and do the best that you can while staying safe.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I think I'd say is that understanding that everybody's situation is different in terms of customer basis. So, as part of making sure that everybody's keeping safe and the communication side of things.
Thank you all for joining us this morning. I really value the time that you've given up to this webinar. I just want to remind everyone else about the Woking Works website. We've got some one-to-one sessions coming up for our local businesses to book, which is free for an hour with one of our business advisors. Also, we have a marketing plan and promotional campaign that we're rolling out with the funds that we got from the European Union Regional Development Fund and delivered by our marketing partner AIS Social. So that brings today's webinar to an end, and thank you for joining us. Thanks very much.